Welcome to the We Know Ball podcast, episode 109, the first episode of the We Know Ball podcast in the calendar year of 2025. We got a great episode today, right? Why wouldn't we have a great episode? Because we got the NFL playoffs bracket set and ready to go. We're going to talk all things NFL. We're also going to talk, of course, the college football playoff. We're going to talk about where we are in the bracket right now, down to the Final Four, what those matchups are going to look like. The NBA and college basketball turn the calendar over, of course, from 2024 to 2025. And naturally, as that happens, things start to get a little bit more spicy and start to heat up a little bit in terms of basketball as a whole on the calendar. We're like 6 weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting to in Major League Baseball. So we have a lot to discuss. We have some free agency for baseball potentially to get to. Doesn't matter. Either way, episode 109 of the We Know Ball podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Let's get into it.
We know ball. First and goal. Mahomes flings it. It's there! Hardman! Jackpot! Kansas City! It's over. Time to say it again, Boston. Anything's possible. Banner number 18 has been secured. The Celtics are NBA champions.
I mean, we know that we know ball around here.
Hail, hail, Michigan. They are the champions of college football 2023.
Start the party, Los Angeles. Your Dodgers have won the World Series.
It is a UConn coronation. The Huskies make history. Back-to-back national champions.
Well, we know ball, so.
You heard LeBron. We know ball all the way to 2025, man. 2025. Happy New Year to everybody that's tuning in. Whether it's your first time, your 1,000th time, well, that wouldn't be possible, but either a repeat listener or it's your first time. No matter where you came from or how much time you spent with us, we really appreciate you guys tuning in to the We Know Ball podcast. My name is Ryan. At Ryan Knows Ball. That's my Twitter handle. Twitter X. At Ryan Knows Ball. At the handle. At We Know Ball Sports. Instagram and TikTok. Go check us out over there. Putting out a lot of breakdowns and more kind of niche football related stuff on TikTok more recently. Have found a newfound interest for me is kind of breaking down the intricacies of the offensive and defensive breakdowns in a football game, kind of the chess match between how certain teams look against each other, where there were some deficiencies and some excellent plays, recognition, stuff that you wouldn't normally see in real time, stuff that I'm learning on the fly as well. But I'd like to show that to people who may not have seen it or aren't aware of. Again, the intricacies of the ins and outs of football, the 22 different players on the field and what all their assignments and jobs are. So I found some stuff like that on TikTok and done some breakdowns there and gained some notoriety and gained some traction based on those things. So if you want to see more of those or you're interested at all, at We Know Ball Sports, that's the handle. Check us out over there. YouTube, again. If you're listening, you're probably on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, but YouTube has full episodes as well. So we got all kinds of stuff, guys, and we've got a great episode today. Episode 109 of the We Know Ball podcast. January, new year, football. You know, every time it comes into January, it's like that means football playoffs, right? That means NFL playoffs. That means college football playoffs. Want to spend a couple of minutes quickly talking at the beginning to shout some people out, but also it's not it's not something that's like always super fun to talk about, but it did have an impact on the sporting world and an impact on everybody. I don't mean to be naive and just say that the sports were the only thing affected, but obviously had an unfortunate circumstance in New Orleans in the early morning hours of New Year's Day. Of course, it did impact the whatever it was, bowl game, Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. That is secondary, but primarily just want to make sure everybody tuning in, anybody gets the chance to tune in or to live a normal life, right? To make sure you keep those people that were affected by that really unfortunate tragedy in New Orleans. Keep them in your thoughts and prayers. Make sure we do everything we can moving forward to, try to avoid those circumstances at all costs. But, don't want to pay the guy, who the perpetrator, if you will, too much time because he doesn't deserve it. But want to keep those people in their thoughts and prayers because it's a really unfortunate circumstance there on New Year's Day in New Orleans. Those that weren't were able to come out of that, hoping for the speediest recovery for those people. And it's important to recognize and notice, like, listen, it impacted the bowl game in New Orleans. It pushed it back a day. Anybody that was concerned about that as it was happening, like, let's just take a second, right? Let's relax. And hopefully moving forward in this year, it's not something we're going to have to deal with as 2025 gets into the middle of January. More sporting events, more big moments like that, right? We want to avoid those things, but keeping those people from New Orleans in our thoughts and prayers. Hopefully we don't see anything like that the rest of the year, the rest of the time, right? Let's be honest. It did happen in New Orleans, and we'll go over in terms of New Orleans, transitioning to sports. The bowl game that happened in New Orleans, the matchup, I think that one specifically was the Notre Dame and Georgia game. So we'll get into that. We'll get into the college football playoff, get into the NFL playoffs, and then we'll start off with basketball. And even before basketball, we'll get into college hoops first. So we'll get into the college hoops slate, schedule, rankings, etc. The rankings, we talked about it, I think, on our last episode in college basketball, or the last few episodes, the prominence of the SEC in college basketball. The bracketology had like something like 13 or 12 or 9, I don't know, a huge number of SEC teams getting into the NCAA tournament, the top 68, if you will. Obviously, only one gets an automatic bid. Based on, you got to win your conference to get the automatic bid. But as you go through these AP top 25 stuff and the coaches poll and the BPI, and, it's hard to disagree with that. It's hard to look at that and go, okay, SEC bias, this and that. SEC bias is something we will certainly talk about here going into the college football playoff conversation. But in terms of men's college basketball right now, as it stands in the AP Top 25, the most recent AP Top 25, you've got in the top 10, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the top 10 are from the SEC Southeastern Conference. Tennessee is ranked number 1. Auburn is ranked number 2. Iowa State 3. Duke at 4. Alabama at 5. Kentucky at 6. Marquette at 7. Florida at 8. UConn at number 9. And Texas A&M at number 10. And again, the SEC teams of those top 10, Tennessee 1, Auburn 2, Alabama at 5, Kentucky at 6, Florida at 8, and Texas A&M at 10. Going through the rest of the top 25, the remaining SEC teams, Mississippi State is at 14, Oklahoma is at 17, Ole Miss is at 23. So the SEC, yes, has cooled off a touch, right? Regardless, seems to be the most represented conference there in the AP Top 25. I don't know what the reasoning is for that exactly. I'm not an expert in basketball or college basketball recruiting. Obviously, NIL is a big deal, but NIL has, I don't know if it seems to have made more of an impact in football as opposed to basketball. I don't know necessarily. But if you look at the discrepancies between the AP top 25 versus the BPI that we always talk about, the Basketball Power Index from ESPN, it actually still has Houston as the number one team in terms of BPI. Houston's been up near the top in the BPI for most of the year, despite starting off slow, accumulating 3 losses pretty quickly. As it stands now, they are number one in terms of the BPI Power Index rankings with a 23.6. Now, the number itself, I don't really, what's a great number? I guess something above 10, frankly. For reference, that the BPI, the Basketball Power Index, measures a team's true strength going forward, expected point margin per 70 possessions versus an average opponent on a neutral court. So BPI is your BPI offensive versus plus your defensive. So I guess it's teams that just do things really well. BPI offense measures a team's offensive strength compared to an average offense on a scale of points per 70 possessions. Same thing on the defensive side of the ball. And each one of those has numbers. So there's an offensive number BPI and a defensive BPI. You add those two numbers together and you get the total BPI for a team. In the case of Houston, their BPI is 23.6. And looking at the offensive and defensive separated BPIs for these college basketball teams, it looks like anything at 9, frankly, 8, 7, 8, or 9 on one side of the ball, offensive or defensive, is really good. And in the case of Houston, their offensive BPI is 9.5. Their defensive is 14.1. So overall, you add those together, you get 23.6. That's the best BPI number in the country. Duke is up there. Auburn is up there. Tennessee's up there. Kansas, Iowa, Alabama, Gonzaga, Arizona, Illinois. A lot of the usual suspects. What is a little bit different, and people may start claiming in terms of college basketball, is, oh, now there's an SEC bias in college basketball because all these SEC teams that were in the top 10 in the AP poll are down towards the teens and even the 20s in the BPI. Florida, A&M, Kentucky, etc. So I don't know. Again, I'm not a college basketball BPI expert. I do know that the AP, of course, is more skewed towards your just overall record and head to head, whereas the BPI is sort of an all-encompassing aggregate calculated number. So the discrepancies aren't egregious, and overall, when you're Tennessee and you're 14 games into your season and you're 14-0 in what is probably the strongest basketball conference this year in the SEC, you're going to be the number one team in the AP top 25 and in the coaches poll. What's interesting about this situation, or at least college basketball now, as we flip the calendar over, like I mentioned, is now we get into conference play, right? So up until what day was this? January 4th. Up until January 4th, Tennessee had not played anybody in the SEC. So they were 13-0, which is, respectable. They had a win against Baylor, who's top 25. But outside of that, they hadn't beaten anybody in the top 25. So again, it's understandable where you look at the BPI and go, okay, well, yeah, they're winning, but it's what if they're winning every game against these, middle tier opponents by 5 points, by 6 points, by 2 points? It's not the case. It's just, you understand. So January 4th, along not just Tennessee, but everybody, as the calendar flips over from December to January, from 2024 into 2025, the conference play starts to heat up big time in college basketball. So looking ahead at Tennessee's schedule, right? They already played Arkansas to kick off 2025, who's in the SEC. They were a top 25 team at the time. They play Florida today, who's top 10. They play Texas, Georgia, Vanderbilt, and then they have a 4-game run at the end of January into February against Mississippi State, Auburn, Kentucky, and Florida. That's as it stands now, that's number 14 Mississippi State, number 2 Auburn, number 6 Kentucky, number 8 Florida. So all these top 10 teams are like forcibly going to have to play each other just because they're in the same conference. That's where men I think are going to separate themselves from the boys. The big time programs are going to start revealing themselves. Sometimes teams struggle to find their identities early on in the year. I think UConn was one of those teams, despite having, solid leadership from Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley himself, I think, struggled to find a little bit of a team identity this year as their head coach, despite being back-to-back national champs. So a lot of parity and discrepancy in these first few weeks, because again, some teams play tough schedules. Some teams play trash schedules. Some teams are in the middle. You've obviously got Tennessee's first few games here being, looking at some of their opponents: Gardner Webb, Montana, Austin Peay, University of Tennessee, Martin. Like, not great, right? Not great. Whereas UConn, looking at their schedule, who they played in the first few weeks, they played some bad games, and then they had to go to the Maui Invitational and play Memphis and Colorado and Dayton, and then they've played Baylor and they've played Gonzaga. So they've played some respectable teams. They have 3 losses, but their conference schedule right now, they're 4-0. So, kind of depends. But again, this January calendar flip is really when basketball, especially college basketball, starts to heat up, and the true star teams, the true threats to win national championships start to reveal themselves. And we're at that point now in the season where conference play is underway. Big boys are going to play, and we'll see what happens. But we got January, we got February, and we got March, right? So be ready for March Madness. Moving on to the NBA. Not much to discuss or talk about, frankly. The NBA Christmas Day stuff kind of came and went. The holiday season kind of came and went. And the NBA has remained on the back burner, has remained kind of in the background, hasn't really gained a ton of traction this year. It's obviously due to a combination of a bunch of different things. A little bit alarming in terms of the NBA to see is, we've talked about it time and time again. We've gone on a bunch of different rants and diatribes about the NBA product and the ratings and viewership and what's gone on in that sport as a whole. And as it stands now, everyone knows it. It's obvious. It's apparent. And despite that, players and coaches and people involved in the league themselves refuse to acknowledge the truth that the league is struggling. Not necessarily financially, right? You got your TV contracts, you got those things. That part's okay. The league's not like reeling for money. But the viewership is down. That's not a disputable, argument. That's a plain cold fact. That's obvious as day. And yet when you ask guys like JJ Redick, who's obviously head coach of the Lakers, even LeBron on Christmas Day after the Lakers played in what was a pretty entertaining matchup against Golden State, regardless, the game was over, the Lakers won or whatever. And, LeBron's getting interviewed after the game saying, hey, Roger Goodell, I love the NFL, but NBA on Christmas Day, like NBA owns Christmas Day or something. It's like, not really, LeBron, not anymore. I mean, they did, but that's because the NFL never thought about NBA on Christmas Day. And frankly, I would imagine the NBA on Christmas Day probably only dominated if Christmas Day itself fell on previously a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, maybe Saturday, right? The days in the last 5, 7, 10 years where Christmas has been a Sunday, I guarantee you the NBA has gotten dominated by the NFL. And guess what happened this year? The NFL stepped in and said, we're going to put a couple games on Christmas Day. And the NFL dominated Christmas Day in terms of ratings. A little bit different calculation with the ratings because the NFL games were on Netflix as opposed to, of course, the NBA games that were on the national broadcast channels of TNT, ESPN, etc. No matter what, what's alarming for the NBA is everybody can see that the NBA is struggling. anybody with eyes and a brain can see the product on the court in the NBA is a shell of what it used to be. There's no rivalries. There's no heated competition. Star players barely participate anymore. And yet you ask the players, you ask the coaches, and none of them are acknowledging it. In fact, they deny it altogether. And that's extremely alarming for the NBA. Adam Silver himself, the commissioner, I'm not sure if he's made a definitive statement or addressed it entirely, that the league ratings are bad, that they got dominated on Christmas Day by the NFL. But the players and coaches, when you ask them about it, are saying, well, we're in a little bit of a transitional phase right now. We're in a different time than in years past. And it just seems to be kind of a lot of excuses to a solution that seems pretty obvious to a lot of different people about how we solve the load management, how we solve the lack of competition, the style of play, the incentivization to certain play styles in the NBA nowadays, the three-point shooting, etc. There seems to be issues. There seems to be pretty obvious solutions. I've seen a lot of people on social media come up with a bunch of different formulas on how we could de-incentivize this and incentivize that to make the product itself better and change the sport and make it more entertaining. And yet the NBA refuses to do anything about it. Instead, they just changed the All-Star game format for the 15th time in the last 10 years. But you ask the coaches, you ask the players, and they go, well, we're not struggling. I don't know about you guys, but I like watching guys shoot. It's like, it just seems like they're just so out of touch. And then what I think the biggest mistake anybody could make, but in the case of the NBA, is denial, refusal of the truth, acting like it's not happening, and then even more so, potentially going in two different extreme directions. Because the NBA's choices are make extreme drastic changes to completely change the game itself, which I don't think anybody's asking for. But what they're choosing at the moment is dig our heels in and pretend like it's not happening either, which is the worst possible thing you can do. You see it within the leagues themselves, like some organizations across all sports have these glaringly obvious plain sight issues that everybody can see. And then when asked about it, the organization specifically are like, well, that's just how we do things. Or like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. And JJ Redick's like, I don't think the NBA is that bad. I don't think the ratings are bad. It's like, well, obviously they are, right? So stop pretending. The real solution's obviously somewhere in the middle of those two possibilities of extreme changes and then pretending it's not happening. Let's find a middle ground. Let's find some obvious solutions that I think anybody could agree to, have some discussion, have the reference points of, I don't know, the exact league itself in the NBA in years past and what was successful for them. And then we can move forward and try to bring the NBA back to prominence, back to the top of mind for a lot of Americans, for a lot of sports fans. But right now the league's reeling. And for some reason, everybody involved in the league is either, no, we're not, or I don't see it, or don't know what you're talking about. But let's change the All-Star game. I don't understand it. It's not trending good for the NBA, man. 2025 and beyond. Again, that's all I'm going to talk about the NBA. I mean, we'll go over the standings, I guess, real quick. Again, not much has changed. The Cavs are in first in the Eastern Conference still. The Celtics are 26-10, even though there's no reason they should be 26-10, while the Cleveland Cavaliers are 31-4. It's just a matter of it's kind of a matter of effort and intensity, right? And choice, frankly. And then on the Western Conference side, the Thunder, the best team in the Western Conference at 30-5. Despite losing Chet Holmgren, interestingly, but SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, has been playing great for them. The Rockets are in second in the Western Conference. The NBA is happy, though, because as it stands now, again, a long way to go, but the Lakers are the 5 seed, Golden State is the 8 seed. You get those two teams in your league, and it's kind of the last bit of nostalgia that the league is like hanging on to in the NBA. Is like the LeBron, Curry, Lakers, Warriors, and it's like, it's over with. So yeah, that's the NBA. That's all we're gonna do. Talking about the sport of basketball. really quickly, want to give a couple more different shout outs, if you will. A couple different supporters to mention. Start off with, by the way, if you made it to this point, you're probably a sports guy. You're looking for sports content. You're interested in pop culture, etc. Want to give a shout out to a couple different companies here. We're going to start with the Mad Hatter Company. That's exactly spelled and said how it sounds. The Mad Hatter Company. And so the website would be themadhatterco.net. The Mad Hatter Company is a couple of buddies that had, a love for hats. They turned them into kind of these custom design hats that are more pop culture related. The Mad Hatter Company, produces a bunch of different apparel and stuff that's not licensed or branded specifically, but it's got a bunch of different cool, branded, similar, mimicking, if you want, brand styles in a good way. And they were really kind enough to send us over a bunch of different hats that were really cool. We got one that said, it's got like the upside down rowdy. We've got one. I got one for my wife. They're really cool. They were really cool with me, and they just sent us some stuff. And they've got really cool hats on their site. So if you go to themadhatterco.com or .net rather, themadhatterco.net, or you can just Google the Mad Hatter Company, you'll find their website. Check out their hats. They got a bunch of really cool stuff, and it's funny. It's like it's funny hats. It's also tasteful hats. They got all kinds of stuff. So go to the site, check them out. Their hats are blowing up right now. They're all over the place. They're really cool, trendy. They look great with like guys, girls, different fits, all this different stuff. So check them out. Separately, want to shout out the Huega House. I got a hat on right now as I'm saying this. That is the Huega House. I guess I'm saying that correctly. They just make awesome hats, and I love their hats. They've got some San Diego ties. I'm born and raised San Diego myself. They had a collaboration hat for a while with Padres player Jake Cronenworth. They make great hats, and I've got a couple of them. Again, neither of these, by the way, are like sponsored. I'm not like getting paid out for this. I just think they make great products. So I think you guys, if you're listening, go check them out. I don't have any discount codes, right? I don't have anything. If those people there, those companies are listening, would love to partner with you guys. But either way, Huega House, Mad Hatter Company, they make awesome hats. I'm a big hat guy. So, yeah, check those people out before we talk about football. Big hat guy myself, and they make some good ones. So, speaking of hats, no, there's no good transition there, but moving on. College football, guys. College football, right? So, I think the last time we talked, the first round of the college football playoff came and went. We ended up with the Elite Eight, if you will, in college football, with Texas and Arizona in the Peach Bowl, with Ohio State and Oregon in the Rose Bowl, Penn State and Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl, and then Notre Dame, Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. So, all four teams that got first round buys with the automatic qualifier of highest ranked conference champions being number 1 Oregon, number 2 Georgia. Actually, I'm not going to say number 1. I'm going to do the seeds, right? 1 seed Oregon, 2 seed Georgia, 3 seed Boise State, and 4 seed Arizona State. All 4 of them lost. All 4 of them lost. Is there something to that? I don't know. The difficulties I think these coaches may express is getting your team and keeping your team in that like super competitive frame of mind. The countdown to how many days we have with this game, and it's, typically a week or so. But the result of that is Texas beating Arizona State, moving on to the Cotton Bowl semifinal. Ohio State beating Oregon in their rematch and beating them soundly. Penn State beating Boise State. moving on to the Orange Bowl and Notre Dame beating Georgia. That one, probably the most, I would say all of them makes sense, right? It is just the fact that the lower C or higher C, whatever you want to say, number 8 or, Ohio State beating number 1 Oregon, number 7 Notre Dame beating number 2 Georgia. It's the fact that the lower seeded teams were all winning in kind of resounding fashion. Frankly, the closest game was kind of the Texas-Arizona State game that went to double overtime. Frankly, Arizona State should have won that game. Cam Scatabo played his freaking tail off, but Texas kind of just comes out on top. And to go over those games quickly, but also to preview these next round games, I think the biggest thing to touch on here, two different things. Notre Dame should have beat Georgia, and they did. They played great defense. I did a video breakdown on TikTok about that. Notre Dame's defense looked awesome. I think that's going to give the Penn State offense a bunch of fits in the Orange Bowl. Notre Dame's defense is fast, is physical. They get after the quarterback. They disrupt the throwing lanes. They play unbelievable coverage on the outside. I think Notre Dame's defense is a problem. I don't love their offense. I don't love Riley Leonard. I don't love the sputtery, inconsistent nature of their ability to move the ball. But if they're able to score 21 to 23 points like they did against Georgia, I think that's enough for them to win that game. If they give up 21 to 23 for some reason, or their offense sputters to a point where Penn State plays also very good physical defense, and Penn State against Boise State and Ashton Jeanty, specifically, they really bottled him up. He had 100 yards, but I think he carried the ball closer to 25 or 30 times. The averages were anywhere from 2 to 4 yards a carry. Let's say that, which is average, but for Ashton Jeanty's sake, I think his average was almost double that this entire season. And with Boise State not having a reliable passing game and kind of relying on Ashton Jeanty heavily enough, they got down in that game against Penn State, and it was over because you can't just keep handing the ball off to Ashton Jeanty, when you're down 14-0. So Penn State's very physical and dominant as well, especially on the defensive side. That Penn State Notre Dame game, as I open it up here quickly, I haven't seen it yet, and I know you probably don't believe me. I have no idea what the over-under is. But historically in college football games, it's in the 50s or close to the 50s. I'm going to guess Penn State Notre Dame over-under is 41.5. Okay, I just opened it. 44.5. Okay, that's a low number. That's a really low number. And I still might take the under in 44.5. I think this game, the Penn State Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl, I think that game's got I think it's got a 16-10 written all over it. You know what I mean? I just think it's defense, it's physical. And I'm curious to see what happens there. My pick in that game would probably be Notre Dame just because their defense is so good. But honestly, I don't know. I don't know. Notre Dame's favored by 2.5. Man, that's going to be a tight game. I don't know. We'll see what happens. And then on the other side of the bracket, so obviously you've got Texas and Ohio State playing each other in the Cotton Bowl. So to talk Texas, Arizona State quickly, Texas was winning big. Arizona State came all the way back, had to score 16 unanswered points, 2 touchdowns, 2 extra points. They did that. They forced overtime and were winning at overtime at one point. Texas had a 4th and a mile, I think, in the first overtime, and they converted it and scored to tie the game, to take it to double overtime. Arizona State's just kind of lack of experience, I think, more than anything, and the heavy reliance on Cam Scatabo were enough for Texas to kind of outlast them. If I was Texas, I'd be really, really, really worried about my chances in the Cotton Bowl Classic against Ohio State. Texas, Quinn Ewers, again, kind of the summation of their entire season, really just looked underwhelming, I guess is the best way to put it. Not a ton of explosives. really faltering when they just needed to bow their necks and step up and get a defensive stop. They're more physically gifted, bigger, stronger, faster than Arizona State was in a lot of areas, and yet they played to their level. And Texas has done that for most of the year. And I know it's unlike a team for, a team that's coached by Steve Sarkisian, but to have such an advantage in terms of speed and strength and to just play to your opponent's level, or when you end up getting played physically to kind of fold a little bit, which has been Texas's MO this year to a degree, it's not a good sign. And it's definitely not a good sign previewing how they performed against Arizona State, their tendencies that I just talked about against a team like Ohio State, who they're matching up with in the Cotton Bowl. So Ohio State beats Oregon 41-21. Ohio State playing their best football at the right time. I said it before and I'll say it again. The winner of that Ohio State-Oregon game was going to win the national championship. I still stand by that. I still think it's the case. Ohio State, as the number 8 seed, now in the Final Four, is by far the best team in the college football playoff bracket remaining. Their whole deal with Michigan, it's a separate issue. I don't know what that's about. I don't know why Ryan Day completely changes everything about that team when they play Michigan. I think Michigan knows how to get in their heads and how to beat Ohio State at this point. But in terms of larger picture, full analysis, offense, defense, both sides of the ball, speed, athleticism, quarterback talent, all things considered, Ohio State is by far the best team remaining of the Final Four in the college football playoff, especially considering how they've gone through this playoff so far, how they dominated Tennessee at home, how they demolished Oregon in the Rose Bowl. And yeah, Oregon had a bye. Oregon didn't look ready to go. But Ohio State's just speed, athleticism, play design, pass protection, defensive pursuit, everything is so much better than every other team in the college football playoff. Texas has the potential to score points. Texas has a solid defense. But Ohio State's offense is better. Ohio State's physicality is better. Ohio State has more speed on the outside. They should dominate that game. Even looking at Penn State and Notre Dame, two teams that play outstanding defense, the offensive side of the ball for both of those teams, Penn State and Notre Dame, simply cannot keep up with the point scoring possibilities, capabilities of teams like Ohio State. Just speed everywhere for Ohio State, right? Penn State and Notre Dame are playing each other. They both got big physical defenses. What happens if either of those teams faces Ohio State and Ohio State goes up 14-0? What's Penn State and Notre Dame going to do? What are they going to do? Run read options with Riley Leonard all day at Notre Dame? Going to force Drew Aller to drop back for Penn State and deliver some balls down the field? Like, Ohio State's by far the best team remaining. So I said it going into the Rose Bowl, and I'll say it again now. The winner of Ohio State and Oregon is going to win the national championship. Ohio State is by far the best team remaining of the Final Four teams in the college football playoff. My prediction would be that they handle Texas resoundingly. I would say the final score might be close to what it was against Oregon, somewhere where it's in the 40s versus a team in the 20s in terms of points scored. And then if Ohio State goes to the national championship and plays either Penn State or Notre Dame, that game has the potential to be low scoring for the first half. But ultimately, the offenses for either Penn State or Notre Dame have no chance to keep up with the offensive explosiveness and speed on the outside from the running back position from Ohio State. And ultimately, Ohio State's going to win the national championship. If Oregon would have beat Ohio State, Oregon would have known Ohio State was the best team remaining in terms of overall talent. And if they'd have beat Ohio State, nobody's beating them at that point, right? But they didn't. And with Ohio State, all the different factors I talked about when assessing their team specifically, but then you include the momentum of just taking down the team, the only team that really resoundingly, looked like the number one team in the country. You went in there, you beat Oregon in the Rose Bowl. No one's going to beat them at this point. They're going to go into that Cotton Bowl game. They're going to throw the ball all over the field. They're going to apply pressure to Quinn Ewers. They're going to win, in my opinion, at least 2 touchdowns, maybe more. But that's my take. So that's where we stand with the college football playoff. Texas and Ohio State on January 10th in the Goodyear Cotton Bowl. I think that's at Cowboys Stadium. Let me see here. Or, Jerry's World, whatever. Yep, AT&T Stadium. The ESPN Analytics, for some reason, has the ESPN Analytics has it at basically 50-50 for this game, despite Ohio State being favored by 6. Ohio State was favored by 5 when it first opened, and it's gone up to 6 now. So I'm one of those that's moved that line. I took Ohio State minus 5.5 as soon as I could. So that's my biggest prediction for that round is Ohio State demolishes Texas. But we'll see what happens. The Penn State Notre Dame game should be fun as well. That's January 9th. That's the Capital One Orange Bowl, Miami. Yep, Hard Rock Stadium. ESPN Analytics has Notre Dame as a 58% chance to win with Penn State at 41%. I think that's a little off. I'm kind of torn on this game. I think Notre Dame has the better defense. I think Penn State has the better offense. Drew Aller's a better quarterback, right? Notre Dame probably has a better run game. I just don't know what to even make of that game. I think that game is such an anomaly. It's two physical teams. It's two, blue-blooded programs. But I think the difference in that game is Tyler Warren, tight end for Penn State. I think if he's getting targets and catches, Penn State wins. If they're able to minimize Tyler Warren's impact on the game for Penn State's offense, Notre Dame wins. Kind of my prediction. I'll pick a winner. I pick Penn State. Penn State's going to win. Penn State, Ohio State, Big Ten matchup in the national championship. Not a great look for the other conferences. Those people already declaring the SEC dead in college football. Terrible representation. You get Tennessee in, you get Georgia in. They both get bounced in their first game. Texas looks terrible. Yada, yada, yada. Listen up, all right? Has the SEC come back down to earth a touch, especially with the all NIL stuff, everybody being able to pay some guys a little bit more? Yes, of course. Did the SEC representation this year include a Georgia team who lost their starting quarterback going into the playoff, a freshman quarterback at Tennessee playing on the road at Ohio State? Ohio State's probably the top 4 team in the entire country. An Alabama team that did make the playoffs, but came into the year losing the greatest college football coach in the history of the sport. Yes. All those things are true. Are they excuses? Sure. The point is, just because the SEC had a middling down year doesn't mean the conference is just nuked off the map and doesn't deserve to be a part of any conversation moving forward. It doesn't. What it does mean is the Big Ten was the best conference this year. For sure the best conference. Top 2 teams in the country for most of the year. Wins or losses outside of the factor was Ohio State and Oregon. They're both Big Ten. Now you got Penn State in the Final Four. Indiana made the playoff. This year, 2024 into 2025, the Big Ten was the best conference. But because the SEC has one down-ish year, despite having representation in the playoff every single year, having national championship matchups be SEC teams multiple times in the last 5-7 years, they had one down year, and people are making direct correlation and causation with NIL, and the SEC's washed because now everyone can pay their players. How about the SEC had one represented team in the college football playoff who lost their starter, a freshman quarterback having to go to Ohio State in the first round, and Alabama who lost the greatest college football coach in the history of the sport? How's that? I don't think that'll repeat itself in the coming years. I think the SEC will be right up there again with the Big Ten. I think everyone needs to relax. Everyone loves to jump on the SEC as soon as they can because the SEC seems to get a little bit more biased than some of the other conferences. Totally agree with that. But it's also not a coincidence if you go on any NFL roster, 40% of the dudes are from the SEC. Like literally. So let's pump the brakes with the SEC's washed and consider all the other factors that led us to this point. And let's see where we are this time next year. That's all I'm saying. All right, moving on to the NFL. So, last piece to talk about here, NFL. The National Football League. Season's over, guys. Season's over. It's very sad. It's sad. It's bittersweet, right? Because the regular season's over, but that means playoffs are starting. So either way, season's over. We'll take a look at the final standings here. We'll take a look at some of the league leaders in terms of stats, and then we'll go over the playoff bracket and what that means. So starting in the AFC, in the AFC East champions, Buffalo Bills, 13-4, the 2 seed in the AFC, had a really good year. 8-0 at home, did not lose a home game all year. Played really well. Josh Allen's obviously very good. Buffalo is a legitimate threat to get to the Super Bowl or to win the entire thing. We'll find out and see what happens. The Dolphins finished second in that division at 8-9. The really disappointing New York Jets finished at 5-12 with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. I think a lot of people picked them to be kind of that 10-7 potential wildcard team. A lot of things didn't go their way. And, the Jets kind of fell apart there towards the back end of the season. Yet to be determined what happens with Aaron Rodgers. We'll see what happens. And then the Patriots there at the bottom of the AFC East finished 4-13, 4 wins, 13 losses. They came out right after the season and fired Gerard Mayo. Don't know why, but they got their guy quarterback in Drake May. So Bills, Dolphins, Jets, Patriots in that order in the AFC East. AFC North, 2 playoff teams, almost had 3, but finished with 2. Winner of that division is the Baltimore Ravens at 12-5. Ravens also had a really good year. Lamar Jackson, again, obviously a threat. Ravens win the AFC North. Legitimate threat to, go on and try to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. I don't think they have a chance at all. I think they're going to have to go to Kansas City. Lamar Jackson, anytime he plays against Patrick Mahomes or against the Kansas City Chiefs, he forgets how to play football. So, if they end up playing against Kansas City anytime, they're going to lose that game. Steelers get in the playoffs also. Out of the AFC North, they finished 10-7. They're a wild card squad. They are trending in the wrong direction at the wrong time. Russell Wilson's not playing very well. They got a couple of guys injured. They barely get into the playoffs at 10-7. They're on a 4-game losing streak to finish the year. And they have no chance. They have no chance to do anything in the NFL playoffs. They literally play Baltimore in the first round. The Bengals finished 9-8. They almost got in, finished the year on a 5-game win streak. They needed some help around the league and didn't get it. And ultimately, their slow start at the beginning of the year once again ended up coming back to bite them. So here we are, Bengals out of the playoffs despite Joe Burrow having a monster season. Jamar Chase winning the triple crown for receivers in the NFL, and they don't get in the playoffs. And then you got the Browns at the bottom of the AFC North, 3-14. Bad year for the Browns, obviously. Deshaun Watson injury. Reports are that there's potentially some setbacks with his Achilles injury. So the Browns won't be good ever, actually. So we'll see what happens. AFC South champions, Houston Texans, finished 10-7. 10-7 for them. They finished 3 games above 500, and yet their point differential was 0. On the nose, 0. Kind of interesting there. Then the rest of this division didn't have any teams over 500. The Colts finished 8-9. The Colts are supposedly keeping their head coach, and Anthony Richardson's going to be the guy at quarterback. They got a lot more questions to deal with than that, but they finished 8-9. The Jags finished 4-13. Started off slow. Trevor Lawrence gets knocked out for the back half of the season, and the Jags just struggled. Yeah. And then the Titans finished 3-14. I guess it was announced today they fired their GM after a couple years. The Titans at 3-14. I think they solidified the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. And then the AFC West, Chiefs, of course, win the AFC West, also get the number 1 seed, also get the first round bye. They finished the year 15-2. They just played the Broncos in this final game of the season, didn't play a single starter for the entire game. So they were 15-1 coming into it. They clinched the 1 seed, had a phenomenal year as a team. And yet, despite being 15-2, they have a lower point differential in terms of points scored versus points against. Lower point differential than the Chargers, Broncos, Ravens, Bills. So they won a lot of close games, a lot of one-score games. Is it sustainable? I don't know. I guess it was sustainable this entire season. Is it sustainable in the postseason? I think more leaning yes, because they have all home games and then the Super Bowl. They know how to do it. They're proven. And yeah, so they go 15-2. The Chargers go 11-6, and they are in the playoffs as another wild card team. They played really well this year. Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey proved to be one of the better connections in the entire NFL. Jim Harbaugh comes in his first year and takes them to the playoffs. Excellent job by everybody around there. Herbert played really well this year. Chargers have really solid defense. I think the Chargers are one of the sneakier threats in the AFC to take out one of the bigger boys in the Ravens, Chiefs, or Bills. They're also the Chargers, and they also find the most egregious ways to lose football games. So Jim Harbaugh is going to have to overcome that. And then the last team in the AFC that made the playoffs, the Denver Broncos, 10-7. Our and my Denver Broncos. I hesitate to say my, because yes, I am a fan, but I'm a bit of an implanted bandwagon-ish, if you will. But I support the Denver Broncos wholeheartedly, and they made the postseason. It is by far the most impressive accomplishment of any team that made the postseason this year in the NFL. The Broncos finished 10-7 to make the playoffs, and it's the largest amount of dead cap space for a team that made the postseason in NFL history. Something like $80+ million in dead cap space. Obviously, the Russell Wilson situation where they owed him a bunch of money and then they released him. And yet, they're able to overcome all that. They're able to produce one of the better defenses in the entire NFL. Bo Nix has been great for them, I think. I think he set the rookie record for touchdowns, whether that's for the Broncos specifically or the league. I don't know. But 10-7, Broncos in the playoffs. Incredible accomplishment. And then the Raiders 3-14. Moving on to the NFC, Eagles win the NFC East 14-3. They're in the playoffs. Commanders make the playoffs as a wild card team at 12-5. Jane Daniels rookie season as well. Had a really good year. Commanders, things are looking up, and it's not a coincidence. Once they release Dan Snyder, get rid of him in terms of his control over the team, all of a sudden the team flourishes and everything goes right. It's literally just that obvious. Cowboys finished 7-10. The injuries to Dak, the injuries to CeeDee Lamb, combined with the overmanagement and lack of vision from Jerry Jones, leads them to where they are now. Mike McCarthy, their head coach, who has done nothing but really succeed in the NFL as a coach, is kind of like listening at other opportunities. Other teams are interested. So see what happens there. And then the Giants finished 3-14 after letting Saquon Barkley walk and releasing Daniel Jones. So that's the NFC East. NFC North came down to the wire, came down to the final game of the season between the Lions and Vikings. Winner of that game was going to get the 1 seed and win the NFC North. Loser of that game does not win the NFC North, but they get in as a wild card squad. So it finished, of course, with the Lions at 15-2, winning the division, winning the number 1 seed, leading the NFL in point differential, having explosive players on offense. The Lions are definitely a legitimate threat. Their defensive deficiencies are a little bit concerning, but they came out against Minnesota with a really solid defensive game plan that I imagine they're going to try to replicate throughout the postseason. And they win that game. They finish 15-2. They get the first round bye. Mentioned the Vikings, 14-3 is their final record. They get in as the first playoff or the first wild card seed at 5 seed, or if you will. 14-3. I mean, that's an unbelievable year for the Minnesota Vikings. 14-3 with Sam Darnold at quarterback, not having JJ McCarthy, having a lot of question marks coming into the year. Nobody expected them to be anywhere near 14-3, but they came out and said enough's enough. Kevin O'Connell's an unbelievable head coach, and Darnold bought in. They protected him, had great game plans the entire year, played really good defense, and here we are. They're 14-3. Fortunately, they have to go on the road in the postseason, but we'll get to the playoff bracket in a second. And then another team out of the NFC North that made the postseason, the Green Bay Packers, 11-6. Packers 11-6 make the playoffs. They kind of struggled down the stretch coming into the postseason with a 2-game losing streak. Finished the year with a loss to the Bears at home, despite playing most of their dudes. Kind of weird. Packers to me are kind of an enigma and tough to put down, tough to pin. They've got good quarterback play from Jordan Love, but then sometimes he plays terrible. They have dynamic weapons and offensive receivers, but sometimes those guys drop passes and never get open. So it's weird. The Packers, to me, a little bit too inconsistent to be considered a legitimate threat. They went 1-5 in the NFC North this year. I mean, that's terrible. And they're a blocked field goal away from against the Bears from going 0-6 in the division. So either way, they got in. Right, and that's the ultimate goal, is to get in the bracket, get in the tournament. But 11-6, 2-game losing streak, inconsistencies all over the field. I'm not sure what the Packers are going to do. And I'm sure as I say that and as we discuss those things, they go to the NFC Championship and, whatever. Bears finished 5-12. Like I said, won the last game of the season. They still have just a ton of question marks. Who's going to be the head coach? Who's going to be the offensive play caller? Who's going to protect the quarterback? Who's going to catch passes from him? It's just so many question marks. The Bears doing what the Bears do best, but the Bears are very active. They're going after like every NFL legit head coaching candidate. We'll see if they can land one. NFC South, Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield win that division, finished the year 10-7. Baker had a great season. It's the only team in that entire division with a positive point differential. They actually scored 500 points this year as a team, 502 to be exact. Only 2 teams in the entire NFC scored 500 points, the Bucs and the Lions. I don't know what that means. Does it mean when there's 6 games against the bad teams in their conference, they ran up the score? I don't know. I do know that the Bucs are respectable. Godwin's out, obviously, for them, but Mike Evans is back and playing at a high level. They got kind of a 2-headed tandem back situation with Bucky Irving and Rachaad White in the backfield. Baker's playing really good at the quarterback position. Todd Bowles is a good coach, and their defense is respectable. And I think the Bucs are a legitimate threat. They get a home playoff game. How that goes, to be determined. That'll be their only home playoff game. But the Bucs are solid. And I wouldn't be surprised if they make a little noise, at least on the NFC side of the bracket. The rest of the NFC South, you got the Falcons at 8-9, disaster situation there with Kirk Cousins. Obviously, they drafted Michael Penix, who played the last couple of games. They lost their last 2. tough to know where the Falcons go from here with the quarterback, with the dead cap, with all the different factors. They have the weapons, right? They need to improve on defense a little bit. They need to improve their consistency on offense, but in terms of the weaponry, right? Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson, now of course Michael Penix, Darnell Mooney, they need to, I think they need more of a cultural change than anything else. This entire year for me kind of felt like the Falcons were sleepwalking. There was really not a ton of urgency in that organization. Like in their home games, the fans weren't really into it. Their defense was lackluster. Their offensive urgency was just never there. There were games where they came back and fought and tied things, but it seemed like a lot of games where it was close and they were forced to amp it up a little bit. It felt like, well, we shouldn't even be here because we were up by this much, or we didn't do anything for 2.5 quarters. Like those types of games, those types of situations for the Falcons. Where they go from here is, I guess they're probably going to try to get rid of Kirk Cousins in some degree. They're going to have to eat his money. They've got Penix at quarterback. You know, they're not going to get a super high pick. We'll see what they do. But they finished 8-9, missed the playoffs. And it's disappointing, I think, for the Falcons in general, based on where their expectations were. So, Bucs at 10-7, Falcons at 8-9. The Panthers and the Saints round out the bottom of the NFC South. Both teams went 5-12. The difference is the Saints just struggled the entire year and probably shouldn't have had a really solid start to the season. Yes, Derek Carr missed a few games. The Saints and the Falcons, to me, gave off kind of the same energy where they just lacked any urgency. Really randomly inconsistent, would put up 45 points in one game and then put up 13 in the next game. That's not the sign of a good team. I don't mean to go too crazy here because I have no fandom or personal bias positively or negatively towards the Saints or Falcons. But candidly, both of those teams kind of just piss me off because it just doesn't really look like they're dedicated to go in one direction. The leadership is seemingly non-existent, both from a coaching staff perspective, from a quarterback perspective. Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, two guys that just kind of get like pushed around a lot. Two guys that make kind of dumb decisions a lot of the time. Two teams that have really, really, really dynamic offensive weapons who seem to just have like huge games and then terrible games. They have high scoring potential and then they score 10 points. Like the inconsistencies are really frustrating if you're a fan of those teams, and just two teams that I'm like, you guys are lame. Like I shouldn't even be anywhere near the playoffs because it doesn't even look like you guys want to be there half the time. And then other games, you just blow people out. So I don't get it. On the flip side for the NFC South, the team to consider a legitimate threat in years to come. And I mean legitimate in terms of like 9-8, right? 9-8 next year. Probably not even that high. But the Panthers, the Carolina Panthers. Bryce Young found his groove at the end of this year. And their head coach came out and said, Bryce is our guy. I don't exactly know what happened to Bryce Young towards the back end of the season, but I said it from the very beginning. This dude was set up for failure. This dude lost all his mojo. He lost all his confidence, which, by the way, happens to any quarterback when you go to a terrible team, one, and two, on that terrible team, you're just thrown into a terrible situation and you got to go get the snap, drop back, and try to throw the ball down the field while you have 3 free rushers running at your face every single play. You see it in Chicago with Caleb Williams, who makes uncharacteristic decisions. Probably expectations were a little too high. He's not the savior of the franchise. Additionally, he gets drilled every other play. So yeah, his decision-making is going to be altered a little bit. Yeah, he's going to be a little bit uncharacteristic with who he decides to throw the ball to, where he decides to throw the ball. Same exact story with Bryce Young. Difference is the back end of the season for Carolina this year, there were no expectations. Bryce Young was able to play a little bit more open, a little more free. Got benched, brought him back. They said, all right, just go do it. You're the starter. Nothing to lose mentality. Lo and behold, Bryce Young played his butt off for the back half of 2024. Played his butt off. And now we sit here with Carolina, and they can be one of those teams that can potentially take that step forward. And that step is, we've got our quarterback. Let's assess other situations. We gave up 534 points this year. Let's fix the defense, right? Got Chuba Hubbard. Don't need a back. Don't need a quarterback. We got some receivers. Maybe go after a guy in the draft. Maybe get an offensive lineman. Get some defensive help. Let's see what we can do next year. But if you're shocked that Bryce Young all of a sudden looked like a really good quarterback at the back end of 2024, the back end of his second season, then you don't know ball. You don't understand the development progress. You don't understand the sport of football entirely. Because the people blaming Carolina for not being good or saying Bryce Young was a bust before he could even finish his second season in the NFL on a franchise that was atrocious in terms of roster protection, or roster assembly rather. You don't get it. If you're one of those people that was like, Bryce Young's a bust, Carolina sucks because he's not good, et cetera, you just don't understand. You just don't get it. You don't know ball. If it's shocking to you that he all of a sudden finished the back end of his second season in the NFL as one of the top 12 quarterbacks in the league, you're surprised by his efficiency numbers going up, then you don't know anything. Because miraculously, shockingly, it actually takes guys time to develop a little bit. It's almost like some of the other really good quarterbacks in the league sat for a year or two, or weren't expected to come in and save an entire franchise as a rookie. Looking around the NFC, Jalen Hurts wasn't the starter right off the bat. Jordan Love in Green Bay wasn't the starter right off the bat. Josh Allen was a nobody and no one expected him to be good. Gave him a couple years to develop. Look where he is now. Yes, it's possible for a rookie to come in and have a big time impact from the onset. But you know what else you need for that rookie quarterback to succeed? A legitimate roster around him. Actual pass protection. Actual offensive weapons. A defense that doesn't give up 35 points a game. All things that Bryce Young didn't have. And yet, at the back end of his sophomore season, his efficiency numbers were up there with the best quarterbacks in the league. Why? Because they put him back in after benching him and said, this is your team. There's no expectation. Obviously, we're not going to compete for a playoff spot this year. Go out, sling the rock. And Bryce Young got all of his mojo back. Like, all of it. It had completely disappeared from his game. And at the back end of this season, Bryce Young looked like the most confident quarterback of anybody in the NFL. Guys throwing no-look touchdown passes to finish out the season and winning games, beating playoff caliber teams, keeping it within 3 points against teams like Kansas City. All because, oh, that's right, you gave him time to develop. Give him time to get comfortable in his own shoes, adjust to the speed of the NFL, not play with that looming dark gray cloud over his head of, if you don't play well, the entire team's failure is your fault. And look where we are now. The Panthers have found their guy at quarterback. Their coach comes out and says, that problem is solved at that position. Let's go improve elsewhere. See what kind of noise we can make next season. Wow. What a concept, man. What a concept. And the last division here, NFC West. So Rams and Seahawks actually finished with the same record at 10-7. Difference is the Seahawks in their conference didn't play well enough, and there was a bunch of tiebreakers, and the Seahawks finished 10-7, but don't get in the playoffs. The only team out of the NFC West, shockingly, is the Rams. Rams win the division at 10-7. Seahawks 10-7, Cardinals 8-9, and then the 49ers with a woof of a year at 6-11. Obviously, the McCaffrey situation where he just like doesn't play football, not ideal. Deebo Samuel having a horrendous regression year and all of a sudden developing a problem with drops. Other injuries on the defensive side of the ball. Fred Warner playing injured the entire year. Dre Greenlaw, obviously the injury in the Super Bowl last year. They just struggled as a team. They couldn't find anybody healthy. Not only like McCaffrey gets hurt, then Jordan Mason, the backup, gets hurt. Then Isaiah Guerrero, the third string, gets hurt. And it's like, just give it up. And they did. So they finished the year 6-11. Good news for them. If they haven't traded them all away, might have a higher-ish draft pick this year. We'll see what they do with that. But the talent for them on the roster is there. They just need to stay healthy, and they need to kind of shift the culture a little bit. But I think they'll be okay. So that's the NFC standings. Looking at the player stat leaders really quick. So offensive and defensive. Joe Burrow led the league in passing yards with 4,918. Good for him. Running back rushing yards leader is Saquon Barkley, who finished with 2,005 rushing yards. Derrick Henry was not far behind him at 1,921 rushing yards. A couple of guys with over 1,900 rushing yards, man. I mean, that's pretty impressive. Receiving yards leader is Jamar Chase with 1,708. Second most was Justin Jefferson at 1,533. And the third most receiving yards this year was Brian Thomas out of the Jacksonville Jaguars with 1,282. Yeah, so Jamar Chase, receiving yards leader. He also, I think he led the league in catches and touchdowns, so he got the triple crown for receivers. And then defensively, Trey Hendrickson takes home the sack title in the NFL on the defensive side. He finished the year with 17.5 sacks, which is really good. Zaire Franklin on the Colts led the league in tackles this year with 173. And in terms of interceptions, Kirby Joseph on the Detroit Lions led the league with 9 interceptions. So there's your league leaders. There's your stats. Lastly, looking at the bracket, playoff bracket. Here we go. So we talked about all the playoff teams that are in. Chiefs are the 1 seed in the AFC. Lions are the 1 seed in the NFC. Texans play the Chargers in the first round. Chargers are favored by 2.5. I'll make all my predictions for the first round of the NFL playoffs, except for the Broncos. As a fan, will not make a prediction on that game. The rest of the games, I'm pretty confident in. Starting in the AFC, Chargers at Texans. The Chargers are going to win that game by at least 10 points, maybe more. They're going to dominate. The Texans are going to look like they've never played football before. The Chargers are going to blow them out. Ravens hosting the Steelers. Very similar story. Game might be close for the first half. Ultimately, the Ravens are going to win that game by multiple scores, and the Steelers are going to look like a bad football team, which I think they're kind of a middle-of-the-road team, and they're coming in with a 4-game losing streak into the postseason. On the NFC side, Rams hosting the Vikings. I think this game is tight. I think this game is close. I think it's closer than most people think, despite the disparity in the records. I think the Rams apply enough pressure on the defensive side of the ball and win on a last-second field goal by a very close margin. Rams beat the Vikings. Commanders, Buccaneers on the road. I think this game is surprising for a lot of people. I think the Buccaneers end up taking it to the Commanders because the Buccaneers know if you contain Jaden Daniels, you will dominate them. The Bucs score a bunch of points. The Bucs actually play really good defense, and I think the Bucs win by at least 10, maybe more. And then lastly, on the NFC side in the first round, Eagles, Packers. I think the huge question mark is, of course, Jalen Hurts and his health and availability. If Jalen Hurts plays in this game, the Eagles win by 7-10. If Jalen Hurts does not play, I think the Eagles win by 3 points. I think the Packers are too inconsistent on the offensive side of the ball. They don't have a single solid, reliable receiver. They have a bunch of good receivers who play really inconsistently. Josh Jacobs is good. Jordan Love is solid. The Packers defense and the Packers team in general for me is just too inconsistent and unpredictable. to expect them to go on the road to Philadelphia and come out of there with a win. So I think the Eagles without Jalen Hurts by 1 to 3 points, with Jalen Hurts by 6 to 10 points. Those are my predictions for everybody. Bills and Broncos is the only other game I'm not going to predict because I'm not going to. But that's the rest of the playoffs. It'll be interesting to see. Again, Texans host the Chargers on Saturday. Ravens host the Steelers on Saturday. Rams, Vikings on Monday Night Football. Interesting. Buccaneers at the Commanders at the Buccaneers, and the Packers at the Eagles. Lions first round bye, Chiefs first round bye. That's it, guys. Episode 109, We Know Ball Podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode. My name is Ryan, like I said, at Ryan Knows Ball. That's my Twitter handle, at We Know Ball Sports, Instagram, TikTok, etc. Check us out on YouTube. Check us out anywhere and everywhere you want to get your content. If you go to my Twitter, like I said, at Ryan Knows Ball, there's a link in my bio. It's a link tree that's got all the links to all of our different channels and all of our different stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I certainly did. Episode 109 in the books. Next time we talk to you guys, there will be a national championship matchup in college football. There will be divisional round matchups in the NFL. Lots to discuss. Super excited for it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode. I'll talk to you guys next time. Peace.
We know ball. First and goal. Mahomes flings it. It's there! Hardman! Jackpot! Kansas City!
It's over. Time to say it again, Boston. Anything's possible. Banner number 18 has been secured. The Celtics are NBA champions.
I mean, we know that we know ball around here.
Hail, hail, Michigan. They are the champions of college football 2023.
Start the party, Los Angeles. Your Dodgers have won the World Series.
It is a UConn coronation. The Huskies make history. Back-to-back national champions.
Well, we know ball, so